You're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's see the top stories. Iran declares the Strait of Hormuz closed, threatening to set fire to ships as the United States warns tougher strikes are ahead. France to boost nuclear warheads and strengthen deterrence, raising global nuclear conflict risks. And videos of Bill and Hillary Clinton's Epstein testimonies are released. Iran has warned it will set fire to any ships trying to pass through the strategic Strait of Hormuz and target Gulf shipping, a vital route for global oil. Since the conflict, oil prices have risen and shipping traffic through the passage has dropped significantly due to the security risks. While Washington says its mission is focused on destroying Iran's missile and naval capabilities, insisting it's not targeting civilian infrastructure.
Iran has warned that U.S. military bases in the Gulf could be targeted as the air campaign enters its third day. Tehran has also declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, threatening to fire on ships attempting to pass. U.S. Central Command says the waterway remains open, but energy markets are already on edge. Around 1/5 of the world's oil supply normally moves through the narrow channel. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran does not want the conflict to spread, but argued that American facilities across the region are within reach.
When the United States attacks us, whether by fighter jets or the ships it deploys, they have access to our territory to strike with all kinds of missiles and aircraft. We cannot reach their territory, but we can reach their bases. I think those bases are legitimate targets.
He also urged neighboring governments to pressure Washington rather than Tehran. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed the campaign would not become an endless war, but acknowledged it could take time.
I said it could be quick and decisive. It may take some time, but it's not going to take years. It's not an endless war. In fact, it's an effort right now to achieve the peace that we all yearn and pray for. And I think together we'll achieve it.
In Washington, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the operation is limited to destroying Iran's ballistic missile and naval capabilities. Secretary of State Marco Rubio echoed that objective.
That said, we would not mind, we would not be heartbroken, and we hope that the Iranian people can overthrow this government and establish a new future for that country. We would love for that to be possible. But the objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and of their naval capabilities.
Rubio also responded to Iranian reports that a school in Manab was struck, reportedly killing civilians. He said the United States would not deliberately target a school and that the military is reviewing the incident. On the ground, the U.S. military says it has struck more than 1,250 targets inside Iran and destroyed all 11 Iranian vessels operating in the Gulf of Oman. 6 American service members have been killed and 18 injured. Iranian authorities say at least 555 people have been killed across 131 cities, though those figures have not been independently verified. Washington says 49 senior Iranian leaders, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, were killed in the opening strikes.
Early this morning, the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh was hit by 2 drones, causing a small fire and some damage. Saudi media reported. The Defense Ministry confirmed the attack on X and shared an initial report. The strike comes after U.S. and Israel attacks on Iran and ongoing Iranian drone and missile strikes on Gulf states with U.S. bases. The embassy was empty at the time. Sources say the fire was minor and no one was hurt. Black smoke rose over the diplomatic quarter and a loud blast was heard with flames around the building. Israel says it has pushed troops deeper into the southern Lebanon while striking Beirut again as missile and drone attacks spread across the region and diplomatic tensions intensify. Our Maria Rodriguez-Abalde has more from Tel Aviv, Israel.
The IDF says it had deployed troops deeper within southern Lebanon beyond the 5 posts currently held by Israel as part of an enhanced forward defense posture. Israel is working to create an additional layer of security for the residents in the north. Meanwhile, has once again bombed the southern suburbs of Beirut for the second consecutive day. As a result, Hezbollah inter-chief was killed. Netanyahu said USA and Israeli war against Iran will not be an endless one. The prime minister said it is up to the people of Iran to change the government, and that's why Israel and the USA were creating the conditions for them to do so, because it's the gateway to peace. Tonight, several Iranian missiles were launched toward Israel, some fragments impacted in different areas without causing any injuries. 2 drones hit the USA embassy in Riyadh. The embassy will remain closed this Tuesday, as will the one in Kuwait. Iran's Revolutionary Guard claims to have destroyed a USA base in Bahrain, while a pro-Iranian militia in Iraq attacks another USA base in Erbil with drones. The USA Department of State has also asked non-essential government personnel and their families to leave Iraq, Jordan, and Bahrain, and urged its citizens to immediately depart from 40 countries in the Middle East. Iran officially announced the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and they say they will attack any ship that attempts to cross it. The war continues, and the big question is what Iran's true ballistic missile stockpile is to continue confronting the threat.
Protests erupted across the United States as demonstrators voiced opposition to the U.S.-Israeli military campaign in Iran. In Atlanta, crowds gathered outside the Georgia state capitol, calling for an immediate end to the war and urging funds be redirected to local public services. In San Francisco, protesters said they were tired of taxpayer dollars funding violence abroad, while in New York, rallies followed the U.S. and Israeli strikes that killed senior Iranian officials. U.S. First Lady Melania Trump chaired a meeting of the United Nations Security Council on Children and Education in Conflict 2 days after U.S. and Israel launched attacks on Iran that prompted a UN warning about child safety. It is the first time a spouse of any serving world leader has chaired a meeting of the 15-member Security Council, the UN body charged with maintaining international peace and security. The plan was announced last week before the launch of the U.S. and Israeli strikes.
The 10,113 meeting of the SEC.
As of the latest updates on Epstein's links to the Clintons, former U.S. President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton have testified behind closed doors about their ties to Jeffrey Epstein, with both denying any knowledge of his crimes.
Do you wish to provide an opening statement?
On Monday, former U.S. President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton denied any prior knowledge of crimes committed by convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein during separate closed-door testimonies before the United States House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. Bill Clinton told lawmakers he never witnessed wrongdoing and said his wife had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. He confirmed writing a note for Epstein's 50th birthday, said photos in the files were likely taken in Brunei, and added he does not recognize a redacted woman shown in the images.
I'm here to offer what little I know so I can do my part to prevent something like this from happening again. I have to just say one personal thing. Since Hillary came in yesterday, she had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. Nothing.
Hillary Clinton told lawmakers she does not recall ever meeting Epstein and said she had no information about his criminal activities.
As we all know, however, too often congressional investigations are partisan political theater, which is an abdication of duty and an insult to the American people. This committee justified its subpoena to me based on its assumption that I have information regarding the investigations into the criminal activities of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Let me be as clear as I can. I do not. As I stated in my sworn declaration on January 13th, I had no idea about their criminal activities. I do not recall ever encountering Mr. Epstein. I never flew on his plane or visited his island, homes, or offices. I have nothing to add to that. Like every decent person, I've been horrified by what we have learned about their crimes.
Tensions rose during her private deposition when she learned that a photograph taken inside the hearing had been leaked, breaching committee rules. She threatened to end her testimony. Proceedings were briefly paused and the image was later removed. During questioning, Hillary Clinton was asked how she felt after seeing photographs of her husband in the Epstein files. Clinton replied that she was not there to offer opinions or speculate. So far, there is no suggestion that either of the Clintons has been accused of criminal wrongdoing in connection with Epstein.
Ukraine has received the first $1.5 billion from an $8.1 billion support program approved by the International Monetary Fund. The payment marks the first installment under a 4-year arrangement, with additional funds to be released in stages subject to reform commitments. Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko said the money will finance priority budget needs and support economic stability. She added that the total IMF assistance to Ukraine has reached $14.9 billion since February 2022. France is set to expand its nuclear arsenal for the first time in 34 years, deepening cooperation with European partners. The move raises questions about Europe's strategic autonomy and the continent's security within NATO. Our European correspondent Anita Sharma has more on the detail of the outcome.
Welcome to This Day in Europe. As France gets set to expand nuclear warhead capacity for the first time in 34 years and will no longer be transparent about the size of its arsenal. The country is estimated to have about 300 nuclear warheads right now. At the Ile Longue Naval Submarine Base in Brittany, President Emmanuel Macron said, quote, "To be free, one needs to be feared, and to be feared, one needs to be powerful." Macron outlined an advanced deterrence strategy that would establish closer, more structured nuclear security ties separate from but designed to complement NATO's existing framework. France proposed temporary deployment of its nuclear-armed aircraft for 8 European countries, including Great Britain and Greece. And all countries are on board. Sweden, Belgium, and Poland signaled they are ready to participate. Germany and France indicated they would establish a, quote, steering group for closer cooperation on deterrence. Denmark said it formally agreed to cooperate due to the military threat from Russia expected to increase in the coming years. Dutch officials maintained this fits their goal of Europeans having greater responsibility over the continent's security amid Russia's war in Ukraine. The US, UK, and France are the only nuclear-armed members of NATO, with France being the only EU member possessing its own nuclear weapons. As France expands its nuclear force and draws European partners into deeper coordination, the debate goes far beyond warheads and delivery systems. It strikes at the core of Europe's security architecture, testing how much strategic autonomy the continent truly seeks and how firmly it remains anchored to the US nuclear umbrella, and whether NATO can evolve without fracturing. In an era of renewed great power rivalry, the question is no longer whether Europe should strengthen deterrence, but how to do so without triggering division, escalation, or a new arms race on its own continent. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Amid escalating tensions in the Middle East, China is calling for urgent de-escalation and an immediate halt to military operations in talks with regional and European counterparts. The appeal comes as fighting between the United States, Israel and Iran fuels growing concern over wider regional instability. Our correspondent has more from Beijing.
In recent diplomatic engagements, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has emphasized the urgent need for de-escalation in the Middle East amid rising regional tensions. In a phone call with the Omani Foreign Minister, Wang Yi called for an immediate halt to military operations and stressed the importance of restraint and dialogue to prevent further destabilization. He highlighted China's support for diplomatic initiatives in line with the international law and the United Nations, and also praised Oman's role in regional mediation efforts. Wang also spoke with the French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, reaffirming China's willingness to coordinate with global partners to promote a political solution and reduce hostilities. China maintains good relations with both Iran and the countries in the Gulf region, Barrot said, voicing his hope to work together with China to play a positive role in easing tensions in the region. For his part, Wang reiterated China's principled position, stressing that the international community should resist any act that violate international law and must not apply double standards. These conversations come against a backdrop of intensified conflict between US, Israel, and Iran, which has drawn international concern over potential spillover effects. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
In Gaza, fuel could run out within days after Israel shut all border crossings. Displaced residents warn famine fears are returning as prices surge.
In Gaza, officials say fuel supplies may last only 3 to 4 days after Israel closed all crossings last Saturday, following joint airstrikes with the United States on Iran. The territory depends entirely on fuel deliveries by truck from Israel and Egypt. Without new shipments, hospitals risk losing electricity, and water and sanitation systems could stop working.
If the crossings remain closed, the Gaza Strip, due to the high population density and the many needs, will inevitably enter a famine, a black famine. What fault do we in the Gaza Strip have in relation to regional and international wars between Iran, Israel, and America?
Local aid coordinators say stocks of flour, vegetables, and other staples are running low. Aid agencies have halted some operations as deliveries are blocked by the closed crossings. Wounded patients are being blocked from leaving for medical treatment abroad, leaving many without care. Israel's military body, Kogat, which controls access, claims enough food entered during the October truce to supply the population for an extended period and did not comment on possible fuel shortages. Meanwhile, the border closures are already driving up prices in local markets.
The market prices have really gone up. Tomatoes are now $6.49. A bag of flour is $64.80, ever since they heard about the closure of the crossings.
The shutdown also casts doubt on a broader US-backed plan to end the war, which involves reopening the Rafah crossing with Egypt, increasing aid flows, and rebuilding the Strip.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss the escalating Middle East crisis and its impact on global markets, energy security, and geopolitics. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. We continue with an escalating Middle East crisis that has jolted global markets and geopolitics. US and Israeli forces have intensified strikes on Iran, reportedly killing hundreds and hitting key infrastructure, including the Iranian state broadcaster, even as Iran launches drone and missile retaliation across the region. Oil markets have surged on fears of prolonged disruption, threatening energy supplies, particularly for China, one of Iran's biggest customers, and injecting fresh tension just weeks before a scheduled summit between President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Beijing has condemned the attacks, called for an immediate ceasefire, and stressed the need to safeguard its energy interests. Meanwhile, security alerts from U.S. embassies echo across the Gulf, and Gulf airspace remains severely disrupted, stranding thousands of civilians. To discuss this, I'm joined by Glenn Howard, President and Chairman of Saratoga Foundation from Washington, D.C. Mr. Howard, welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Mr. Howard, President Donald Trump's actions have significant economic implications for China, given its reliance on Iranian crude oil. How vulnerable is China's energy security right now?
Well, right now, China is basically trying to determine how long this war is going to last. The biggest problem for them is if the Straits of Hormuz remain closed to tanker traffic, and whether the war continues with Iran hitting Iraq oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, also in Qatar and the UAE. So there's a great uncertainty in the market. And President Trump has said that the war would continue on as long as 4 weeks. So the 4-week timeline is going to be very critical to China, which is basically right now unable to do anything to stop the war. And so the escalation continues, but Iran remains determined to continue the war as long as possible because of its havoc on the world energy markets.
Beijing has condemned the strikes and called for an immediate ceasefire. How significant is this diplomatic posture, and what might China be signaling ahead of the Donald Trump and Xi Jinping summit?
Well, there's no doubt that China wants to de-escalate the conflict. It doesn't benefit China at all. So right now, the problem is that China is a member of the BRICS Economic Organization. It's created the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's created all these multilateral organizations, and basically it's unable to do anything. So China right now is a victim to all this and is basically unable to react and be able to influence the situation, because ultimately what happens in the Persian Gulf is about military power, and China just doesn't have that capability to project power into the Gulf. So right now they're going to have to sit back and wait and watch what happens. I would like to point out one thing too, is that China actually imports more oil from Saudi Arabia than Iran. So Saudi Arabia is also very critically important to the whole energy mix for the Chinese economy, not just Iran's. But as long as Iran continues to hit or threaten Saudi oil facilities, it's going to be a major danger to the market and create disruptions. And so we just don't know how long this is going to continue. The greatest danger for Beijing is if the war keeps going on, as President Trump has said it would, for another couple of weeks. I really doubt if that's going to happen, but we'll see. And it's a very, very dangerous situation right now.
Mr. Howard, what are the potential global economic consequences if the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed or severely disrupted?
Well, that's a great question, because we really don't know. I mean, it's basically Saudi Arabia is able to influence through its diverse oil supplies, through alternative pipelines that is built bypassing the Gulf. So Saudi Arabia has been prepared for this for a while. But you also have the factor of the United States now controlling Venezuela's oil. So the United States has enough production capacity, and there's enough oil coming out of Venezuela, I think, right now, to continue the production for the world markets. I think, again, if this goes on much longer, that's the greatest danger. I think for a week or two, certainly the markets can really be, there won't be a great significant risk to world oil markets. But as long as the war continues and goes on further, that's a big question right now, because then that could be really 20% of the world's oil coming out of the Straits of Hormuz will affect the economy significantly. And countries like Azerbaijan will have to export more oil to Ceyhan Pipeline, Kazakhstan, and Russia. So Russia may actually be the biggest beneficiary of the war, because China may turn to Russia for more oil imports.
Concerning the emerging markets, how might these developments influence global oil prices, inflation, and economic stability in emerging markets?
Well, the emerging markets is really, that's going to be a big factor. It's going to affect a lot of the emerging markets more than it's going to affect Europe. Europe right now, is becoming more increasingly dependent on the United States for LNG. They certainly cut off the gas from Russia. But the thing right now, I think the biggest unknown we don't know is about Qatar's ability to export LNG. Its exports of gas are very critical to a lot of economies, India, Pakistan, other countries, and as well as in Europe. So if Qatar gas remains offline, it's going to have a significant impact on the global prices. But again, we just don't know. If this conflict goes on more than a couple of weeks, then yes, the answer to your question is it could cause significant impact. But if it's temporary and lasts only another week, and the only way we know that is going to be whether Iran has enough missile launchers or drones to continue the attacks, because I just don't see Iran at this point, after the death of Khamenei, stopping this war. They know that as long as they continue the war and inflict pain on Israel and the United States and on world oil production, they certainly have the U.S., quote unquote, over a barrel.
Mr. Howard, we are seeing U.S. Embassy security alerts across the Gulf. How unprecedented is this in recent Middle East conflicts, and what does it say about the security environment?
Well, the security environment is very. You have not seen an environment like this. This is completely. This current war is far more dangerous than what the 12-day war, what Israel and Iran went through last year. So, the United States cannot really endure a long war. It's very much overstretched. So is Israel. So this is going to be the terrorism threat, as you've seen. Through the attacks on Hezbollah on Cyprus, it certainly brought in Great Britain has become involved, and so the regional dynamics of this are immense. Yesterday in Pakistan, the United States killed 11 people who were trying to enter the U.S. embassy in Islamabad. So the Marines shot and killed 11 people. It's certainly escalating all around. We really don't know how this is going to emerge. There certainly will be incidents throughout Europe and maybe even potentially in the United States. But again, the timeline is really, we don't know how much Iran and to what extent Iran will go to activate some of the groups and that it supports, like Hezbollah. I mean, it's continuing. So we really need to, we're headed into uncharted territory right now, and it's the worst we've ever seen in the Middle East.
In your view, can diplomatic channels still prevent a deeper war?
Well, that's a big question because we don't know. President Trump yesterday said that he's still hearing pleas from Iran to go ahead and stop the war. They still want to negotiate. I think that's just a negotiating posture by President Trump, who's under a lot of domestic pressure right now because the United States has kind of entered a war. And it doesn't really seem to have an exit strategy. I think the United States was hoping that Iran would, there'd be a series of attacks, and then they would call suspension of attacks and then resume negotiations. But the environment's changed. I mean, the United States or Israel killed Khamenei, so this has created an environment that Iran is now very much in seeking retribution for these attacks. And it knows, and in fact, you may get somebody in Iran that's more conservative, more of a hardliner than you had with Khamenei. And so if the Iranian regime, which is built to withstand coups d'etats and is built for endurance and survival, if they endure this conflict, then certainly the United States is going to be the one that's going to have to ask for a timeout, for peace, for suspension of hostilities, because the United States just can't endure a long war in the Middle East. Neither can Israel. So everybody's looking for an exit strategy right now. Even though the United States says it can continue the war, there's a lot of posturing going on by the United States where they're the ones threatening this, trying to sound impressive that they can continue the war, but really it creates a lot of problems for the United States with the upcoming elections, the midterm elections in the United States. There's a poll that's out that shows only 1 out of every 4 Americans supports the attacks on Iran. So the popularity of President Trump is going to be really matter and affect what's happening in the Gulf and whether the United States tries to get out of the conflict sooner rather than later.
Mr. Howard, what role should international institutions like the United Nations or the International Atomic Energy Agency play right now to mitigate the crisis?
Well, that's virtually nothing. President Trump has bypassed the United Nations. He's created his Board of Peace. So the United Nations is really not a clear factor right now at all. So it really boils down to basically the views of the President of the United States and whether U.S. allies will pressure the United States to do something to stop the war. Also, Israel is they're planning elections in Israel as well. So there's an election boost for Netanyahu by helping to organize and launch these attacks on Iran. So everybody politically is jeopardized, and the world is helpless. I mean, just basically, the UN can't do anything right now. And so the only thing that will happen will be pressure, as you mentioned about Trump's upcoming visit to China. Yes. China will try to pressure the United States. It'll affect the markets. And so I would look to the markets in Washington or New York to see how the global markets react to this, because if it keeps going on longer, then that will create pressure on Trump to call an end to the war. But right now, I don't see world bodies like the UN playing a big role, if any. Other than countries like Russia will denounce the United States, but there really isn't much that can happen.
As you have mentioned China, how could this conflict impact U.S.-China relations beyond the immediate oil and energy concerns?
Well, it's just a temporary, it's basically, it's a jolt in U.S.-China relations. I don't think that it will jeopardize U.S. relations with China. Look at what happened with Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela was a major oil exporter to China, and we just basically took out Maduro and removed him from power. So, and we moved, the United States basically said that Venezuela can't export any more oil to China. So China was helpless. It couldn't really do anything. And now the United States is going after Cuba. And it's going to take out another ally of China. So basically China is a superpower, but again, it can develop is to align with Russia and North Korea and teaming up with Iran. That's the only option that it has right now, is to continue to call for de-escalation. And I don't think it'll jeopardize the trip to China. I think President Trump desperately wants to go to China. This is going to be a hallmark, a high point in his second term as president. He very much wants to develop and keep the good relations with China going for the very purpose of its importance to the American economy. So I just don't see that happening, but the United States will try to go to China. I think there's a possibility that she may cancel the visit, but I think it's a long shot, and I think you'll probably see a suspension of hostilities before in the next couple of weeks, and that will basically mean that the summit is still resuming and still on.
Glenn Hopper, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your insights on this extremely complex and consequential crisis. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Now, let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Baku hosts ministerial meetings of the Southern Gas Corridor and Green Energy Advisory Councils today. President Ilham Aliyev highlighted Azerbaijan's achievements in gas exports to Europe and the development of renewable energy, the country's role in European energy security, particularly through the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, remains a key focus of discussions. Here is more.
Representatives of 25 countries and the European Union gathered in Baku to talk on the state of energy cooperation with the host, Azerbaijan, and to plan next steps. Dozens of delegates of international financial institutions and energy companies filled the Congress Center as the ministerial meetings on the Southern Gas Corridor and green energy got underway. In a keynote speech, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev spoke on the milestones his country has achieved when it comes to producing and exporting energy, as well as plans for renewables. Highlighting that Azerbaijani gas now flows to 16 countries, 10 of which are EU members, Aliyev said that Azerbaijan currently ranks first in the world in terms of the number of countries to which it supplies gas through pipelines. On green energy, Azerbaijan's president said when the current projects are realized, the country is expected to obtain 6 to 8 gigawatts of energy from alternative sources by 2032.
So this, of course, is a big asset. So we need to export it, and we need to use this electricity for domestic purposes to substitute natural gas, which we are using so far to produce electricity, and to provide conditions for growing economy, growing industry, including our plans with respect to communication sector, AI, data centers. All that are already projects which are in the pipeline, especially after signing last month here in Baku between Vice President of United States and myself, the Charter on Strategic Partnership between the United States and Azerbaijan, which covers many areas, including AI, energy, connectivity, and many others.
The meetings that followed were co-chaired by Azerbaijan's energy minister and the European Commissioner for Energy and Housing. The guest from Brussels spoke of Azerbaijan at the opening session as the backbone of European energy security today, pledging that the EU will remain a reliable buyer.
When Russia began its war of aggression and its weaponization of energy, the European Union took the decision to diversify our energy supplies. To replace Russian energy, we turned to our most trusted and reliable partners, and Azerbaijan was chief amongst these. Since then, we have significantly increased natural gas deliveries through the Southern Gas Corridor. And since late 2020, the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline has already delivered more than 50 billion cubic meters of Caspian gas to Europe.
What followed were 3 sessions on the current state of the Southern Gas Corridor, a new stage in its development, and green energy projects. When it comes to numbers, data shows that out of 25.2 billion cubic meters of gas Azerbaijan exported last year, some 51% went to Europe, while Turkey, Georgia, and Syria accounted for the rest.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has spoken with NATO chief Mark Rutte as regional tensions continue to soar. The phone call focused on security developments and preparations for an upcoming NATO summit. Here are the details.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke by phone with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on Monday, as diplomatic efforts intensified amid heightened regional tensions. According to a statement from the Turkish presidency, the two leaders discussed geopolitical developments, including conflicts and security challenges affecting Turkey and the wider Middle East. Erdogan told the NATO chief that Ankara was closely monitoring the regional conflict between Iran and the United States and Israel, stressing the need for sustained diplomacy to prevent further escalation. He emphasized that dialogue and coordination among NATO allies was essential during periods of uncertainty. The conversation also covered NATO's broader strategic agenda. Rutte reaffirmed NATO's commitment to collective defense, highlighting the Western alliance's so-called 360-degree approach to addressing perceived regional and global threats. In their phone call, the two men also reviewed preparations for an upcoming NATO Leaders Summit, which is set to be hosted in Ankara this summer. Erdogan noted that Turkey's preparations for the summit were continuing as planned and reaffirmed Ankara's commitment to contributing to NATO's unity and security. The phone call coincided with Ankara's stepped-up diplomatic engagement with regional and global leaders in response to rising regional tensions and wider security concerns. Officials say Ankara aims to maintain close coordination with NATO allies while advocating diplomatic solutions to crises, including the burgeoning regional conflict that erupted on Saturday. The conversation between Rutte and Erdogan underscored Turkey's continued role within NATO as both a frontline alliance member and a key diplomatic actor in the region. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
In Tehran, part of the historic Golestan Palace has reportedly been damaged following a nearby bombing on the second day of the US-Israeli invasion of Iran. Iranian officials say the conflict could extend beyond the countries directly involved and have described the war as likely to be prolonged. Our correspondent has more from Tehran.
I'm reporting from Golestan Palace, a cultural heritage site in downtown Tehran, which was partially destroyed when a nearby government building was bombed on the second day of US-Israel invasion of Iran on Sunday. In a new development, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, in a televised interview, said Iran had warned that the US-Israel invasion of Iran will not be limited to these countries, and the war will extend to other countries in the region. He urged the regional countries to pressure the United States for not using its bases on these countries' soils to attack Iran. He said Iran was not surprised when United States and Israel attacked Iran once again in the middle of negotiations and said that United States betrayed the negotiating table. In another development, Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani, said that the war with US and Israel will be a prolonged one. In a message on X, he said that this war will be a long war. Earlier, he had said that Iran will not be negotiating with the United States after US President Donald Trump said that Iran has approached the US side for negotiation and de-escalation. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
People crossing into Turkey from Iran describe heavy destruction, panic and a collapse in currency after days of bombing.
The bombs that they were dropping were really big. There's a lot of casualties that we saw. We saw a lot of buildings destroyed, especially on the way leaving the country. There was a bunch of buildings, a bunch of cars, and streets were destroyed. People are panicking to leave the country. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to call.
What about food? So for the currency, obviously there was a sudden drop as soon as the war started. It lost more value. Most of the restaurants and cafes were closed for business, obviously. In terms of the markets, people were living their day-to-day lives. It's not like they can stop living. But there is a certain stress in the air, when this kind of stuff happens. Obviously people are a little bit scared and they are upset. Especially considering that, the bombs are never particularly just for military sites.
What we observed was that things started shutting down everywhere. Especially bread queues started forming. Cash wasn't circulating anymore. Everything there was done by card.
Hundreds of foreign nationals are also being evacuated through Azerbaijan's Astara border crossing as they leave Iran due to security concerns. Our correspondent Gulcin Kojalieva reports from the ground.
Evacuation operations at the Astara State border checkpoint continue around the clock as foreign nationals arrive from Iran amid ongoing regional escalation. To date, over 600 people have crossed into Azerbaijan through this corridor, the majority of them foreign citizens. The largest groups include over 150 Chinese nationals, 130 Russian citizens, 70 Pakistanis, and 60 Tajik nationals, alongside smaller contingents from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, Qatar, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Nepal, Georgia, Kazakhstan, France, Uzbekistan, Turkey, Italy, Poland, Tunisia, Lebanon, India, and Brazil. Diplomatic staff are also among those evacuated. A 6-member team from the Slovakia was transferred safely through the checkpoint earlier, highlighting the role of Astara as a functioning land route amid restricted regional airspace. Overnight, the ambassador of Serbia to Iran, Damir Kovacevic, together with embassy staff and family members, entered Azerbaijan via Astara, following reported strikes affecting diplomatic facilities. Serbian representatives had requested assistance and their transfer was facilitated through coordinated efforts. Humanitarian and logistical arrangements remain in place to ensure safe entry, documentation checks, and onward transportation. Evacuation movements continue as tensions linked to the confrontations involving the United States, Israel, and Iran persist, with further crossings expected. Gulcin Kojalieva, Nijat Kasimov, A News.
Georgia's ruling Georgian Dream Party has suggested changes to the country's election rules that would allow only foreign citizens to act as international election observers. Critics say the move could affect transparency and the trustworthiness of election monitoring. Our correspondent reports from Tbilisi.
The Georgian Dream Party has introduced amendments to Georgia's election code that would restrict international election observers to foreign citizens only. The proposal was presented at its first reading during a session of Parliament's Legal Affairs Committee by Georgian Dream MP David Matikashvili. Under the draft amendments, an international observer accredited by an international organization must hold foreign citizenship and be at least 18 years old. The bill also defines procedures for registering interpreters accompanying international observers. In addition, it authorizes the Central Election Commission of Georgia to establish rules governing photo, video, and audio recording at election commission sessions. According to Makikashvili, the amendment aims to minimize political bias and prevent what he described as ambiguous approaches in international monitoring. He referred to the 2020 parliamentary elections, stating that there had been attempts to discredit the parallel vote tabulation process. The ruling party maintains that limiting observers to foreign citizens aligns with international standards and reduces the risk of assessments influenced by domestic political interests. Opposition representatives, however, argue that the change could narrow participation in monitoring missions and potentially exclude locally based experts working with international organizations. They say that the proposal raises concerns about transparency and could affect cooperation between domestic civil society groups and international observers. Political analysts note that while international practice emphasizes independence and neutrality, observer eligibility rules differ across the countries. They say the practical impact of the amendment will depend on its implementation and whether it affects the credibility and inclusiveness of election monitoring in Georgia. The bill will undergo further readings before a final parliamentary vote. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Fighting between Afghanistan and Pakistan has entered its 6th day, with civilian casualties continuing to rise. The United Nations says at least 42 civilians have been killed and more than 100 injured in cross-border clashes and airstrikes. As tensions remain high, thousands have been displaced and calls are growing for an immediate ceasefire.
The United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan says at least 42 civilians were killed and 104 injured in fighting between Afghanistan and Pakistan from 26 February to 2nd March. The clashes have now entered their 6th day. UNAMA says most civilian casualties were caused by cross-border shelling and airstrikes. The figures are described as preliminary. Afghanistan says it has captured a Pakistani post in Kandahar. Pakistan, meanwhile, says it has carried out airstrikes on Taliban military sites. According to Pakistani sources, a military base in Nangarhar has been destroyed. Kabul accuses Pakistan of targeting civilians. Islamabad denies the claim. Both sides say they have inflicted heavy losses on each other, but these claims have not been independently verified. UNAMA has called for an immediate halt to the fighting. It says around 16,400 households have been displaced. Restrictions along the border are also making it harder to deliver humanitarian aid.
Afghanistan's environmental authorities are seeking international support to take part in the next global climate summit. Officials say the country must be allowed to present its climate challenges on the world stage. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
The Director General of the National Environmental Protection Agency, Matiul Haq Khalis, has called on Turkey to facilitate Afghanistan's participation in the upcoming COP31 climate conference, which is set to be held in Turkey. Khalis urged the Turkish acting ambassador in Kabul to support Afghan representation, saying environmental issues are humanitarian concerns and should not be politicized. Turkey's acting ambassador in Kabul, Sadin Ayildiz, acknowledged that Afghanistan is among the countries most affected by climate change, adding that developed nations must take responsibility for supporting vulnerable states. The request follows a mixed record at recent climate talks. Afghan officials attended COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan in 2024. Their first UN climate conference appearance since 2021, but only as observers invited by the host country, not as a formally recognized negotiating party. However, Afghanistan was not invited to attend COP30, with no official invitation issued by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Meanwhile, the country faces severe environmental pressures. Droughts have damaged agriculture and worsened food insecurity. Flood has destroyed homes and farmland, and rising temperatures have reduced water supplies. while major earthquakes have compounded the humanitarian crisis. Afghan officials now hope that participation in COP31 will give the country an opportunity to present these challenges directly to the international community. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A News.
Kazakhstan says it's stepping up efforts to complete the investigation into Azal plane crash. Officials insist the final conclusions will be based strictly on verified evidence as international examinations continue. Our correspondent from Almaty has more.
In Kazakhstan, officials have pledged to accelerate the investigation into the crash of the Azal aircraft. The Minister of Transport says the commission handling the case is making every effort to complete its work as quickly as possible. Investigators are currently reviewing expert assessments and detailed technical reports. Authorities stress that the conclusions will be objective and based strictly on verified facts. Transport Minister Nurlan Sauranbayev has previously stated that the final report will only be published after data is received from 2 foreign laboratories. Those results are still pending. At the same time, a modular avionics unit from the aircraft has been sent to the U.S. manufacturer Honeywell International for examination. This was confirmed by Deputy Prime Minister Kanat Bozumbayev, who heads the commission. The crash has also been discussed at the diplomatic level. Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk said after talks with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev that Moscow and Baku agreed on next steps related to the disaster. The aircraft was traveling from Baku to Grozny when it crashed in western Kazakhstan on December 25, 2024. There were 67 people on board, including 62 passengers and 5 crew members. 29 survived the crash. And according to preliminary findings cited by officials, the aircraft crashed as a result of physical and technical external interference that occurred in Russian airspace over Grozny. On the 9th of October 2025, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the aircraft had been within the range of Russian air defense systems. He stated that 2 missiles detonated near the plane while intercepting Ukrainian drones and that this led to the crash. Russia has said it's ready to provide additional information to investigators and to pay compensation to those affected. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
That's all we have for the hour. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned to A News for more updates.